Hello everyone. Oh, hi. And welcome to this week's episode 2 of Composer Tea with Miss Sperotto. This is my co-host, Kitty, and he literally does nothing. Except for he has cuteness, don't you? That's his only job. This week we are going to be talking about Hector Berlioz. And Hector Berlioz was a composer from the early Romantic period. And the Romantic period in music was like 1830 to about 1900. This is my personal way of describing him is the drama queen of the Romantic period. The dude loved love. He liked to also emphasize emotions over reason. And I think that definitely reflects his life story, which we're going to talk about. And a lot of the music he wrote is about anguish and the triumph of love. He loved love. So let's talk a little bit about this dude. Okay, so he was born in France in 1803, and his most famous works, I would say, are Symphonie Fantastique, which we're going to be talking about, A Herald in Italy, the Roman Carnival Overture, and the Damnation of Faust. I'd say those four were probably his most famous, and I'll link them all below so you can hear them. But we're going to specifically be talking about Symphonie Fantastique today, which I think is actually his most famous of all of them. So let's talk about his early life, like what went on with this dude. So his dad was a country doctor. I actually don't know anything about his mom, like at all. That's okay. So he expected Berlioz to follow in his footsteps and also become a doctor of some sorts. And his dad provided a very good education for Berlioz. That's something he did do. So Berlioz went to school, like with other kids, until he was like 9 or 10. And then from then on, his dad took him out and homeschooled him. It was like good homeschool. Part of all this homeschooling that Berlioz had to do involved some music lessons. Like, let's make a well-rounded individual, shall we? But his dad wasn't like into music. Berlioz really liked it. He was like, oh my gosh, I love this so much. I want to become a musician. And his dad was like, his dad just didn't really support it. It wasn't a thing he valued. He was like, no, I'm spending money on you to do all these things and you're going to become a doctor. That's what you're doing. Instead, he did all these studies like his dad asked him to, but the music lessons he took were for flute and guitar. And he took them from local musicians in the area like anybody else does nowadays. But this is actually really unusual for the time. Most composers, if you think about it, like the big ones who have like big works from this time, they either played piano or violin, because these were like considered at the time like very virtuosic instruments. Like that's what you learn to play if you're going to be awesome or famous or something like that. But his dad refused to even buy him a piano. Like Berlioz asked, like, Dad, can we please get a piano? And his dad's like, absolutely not. Not in my house. That means that Berlioz was one of the few composers in history that never mastered that instrument. Oh no, you don't, co-host. Bailed on me last time. So he was one of the only composers in history that didn't master the piano. Like his piano skills were like, they're like the same level of mine. And you've heard me play, and it's pretty awful. Dad said, yeah, no, okay, we're not getting a piano. Great, you can play music, I'm glad you like it, but you're gonna be a doctor. So when Berlioz was 18, he got shipped to Paris by his dad, and he went to the School of Medicine there. And he hated it, as you can imagine, and he wrote one time in a journal, he was like, I really don't like dissecting bodies and stuff, and he said he found it revolting. If you're not ready to do those things, you probably shouldn't be a doctor. That's like the biggest sign. And also while he was in Paris going to school to to get this medical degree that his dad is pretty much making him get, he like took full advantage of the arts in Paris. So a lot of times in Paris, because this was kind of the beginning of the Romantic era, or it was like starting to come about, he took full advantage of the music scene, and a lot of it was actually Italian opera that they had showing in Paris at the time. So that's what he did and went to go see a lot of times, was just a lot of different musical things. A lot of it was opera. And eventually, during that time, he got his degree, and he was like, okay, cool, got my medical degree. So he was like, hey Dad, now that I did what you wanted, I'm not gonna pursue the rest of this degree, because you know, you have to like do more stuff in the medical field. I guess you did back then too, I have no idea. But he was like, I'm not gonna continue with this, I'm not gonna be a doctor, I just did what you want. And his dad was not happy, and his dad threatened, and he did a couple times, like cut off his funding. Like, well, if you're not gonna do this, then I'm not gonna pay for this, I'm not gonna pay for this, and blah, 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 blah. And there was a time in Berlioz's life, and he had some financial hardships because his dad was the one who was like, you have to go to Paris to do this, I will pay for you, and then he was like cut off. I think eventually Dad still supported him a little bit through school, but there was a time where it was a little rocky for him. He went to go study music full time. He got accepted into the Paris Conservatory for composition, and he was like, all right, I'm gonna do this, and I'm gonna, no you don't, you're staying here. So he was like, I'm going to win the biggest prize in France, which at the time was the Prix de Rome. And, hold on. By the way, I'm drinking an organic pomegranate white tea. Thanks, Trader Joe's. Anyways, the Prix de Rome, it was a French scholarship for arts students, and it was not just like people in the arts, it kind of extended to different categories. So there was music, there was art, there was sculpture, later on they added architecture, so it was like different categories for it. And this scholarship allowed these students to live in Rome for anywhere from 2 to 5 years. And the cool thing about this, France would pay for everything. So if you won this award, if you won this scholarship, they'd let you go live in Rome for like nothing. You don't have to pay for anything. So if you're like, France, I require vanilla organic yogurt every morning, France would be like, I'm totally paying for that, okay? Just keep writing music. Can you imagine how sweet that deal would have been? I don't eat yogurt though. It's okay. Actually, French yogurt is delicious. Maybe that's why I don't eat yogurt anymore, because US yogurt is not the same. Anyway, I digress. So this scholarship, it actually started in 1663 with Louis XIV, but France stopped it in 1968, probably because it was getting to be pretty expensive. So this scholarship ran for 305 years in France. It's pretty amazing, but I can see why they would have stopped it. It was probably pretty pricey. So anyways, Berlioz enrolls to do this, and it's his first attempt, like, yeah, here's my first composition. And the Prix de Rome people were like, denied. That was awful. Bye. And he was like, oh, okay. However, at the same time as he's composing that and submitting all this stuff, he was probably a little bit distracted because he thought he was in love. In September of 1827, there was this touring production of Shakespeare's Hamlet. Okay, you can go. This is not working. I don't know why I pay this guy. So there was a touring production of Shakespeare's Hamlet. And in this production of Hamlet, there was an actress. Remember this person's name, because you're going to hear it a lot. Her name was Harriet Smithson, and she was an Irish actress, and she played the role of Ophelia. And Berlioz saw this rendition of this play for the first time, and he was like, "Be still my heart. I am in love with this woman on the stage." Very dramatic. Drama queen. He didn't know her. He didn't know anything about her. But he did everything he possibly could to try to have some kind of contact with her. So he would hand deliver notes. He would stand outside the stage door, like backstage, and like try to catch a glimpse of her. Or he would try to go backstage and be like, can I please talk to Harriet? And people were like, who are you? And this happened for several years. It was about 3 years. So it wasn't just like, I saw a few shows and I really want to meet this person. It was like, you're stalking this girl. It was that's kind of messed up. And she, and I can't blame her, she was just basically ignored him. She was like, that dude is crazy, and she refused to meet him. She was like, I'm not talking to that man. Which, I can't even blame her. Can you imagine? That's creepy. But that's what he did. 3 years later, he's stalking this girl for like 3 different years. But remember that name, Harriet Smithson. 3 years later, he meets this other lady, and she went by the name Camille. And he and Camille, they actually fell in love. So it wasn't just like this fake romance, like a stalking situation. It was like, oh, she likes me too. And they both fell in love with each other, and as far as I know, there was no stalking in this situation. Good thing. So they're happy and they're like, let's get married. Love you. But Camille's family was like, no, you're not marrying my daughter. You're an unemployed composer, and how are you supposed to support her? And if you guys have a family, how are you supposed to support this family? So Berlioz is like, okay, yeah, they're kind of right. So he tries again to win the Prix de Rome. He was like, I'm gonna get this award. So Berlioz tries to win this award 3 more times. So it was the first time and he got like denied. And then that happened 3 more times. But you gotta give him some credit to like keep at it. But this whole time he's doing this because if he did this, then he would get the approval from Camille's parents, which is pretty romantic if you think about it. So finally, this is the 4th time he's entered and he wins it. He wins it with his piece Symphonie Fantastique. And it's this huge hit. It does amazing. And so he goes off to Italy and he does have Camille's parents' permission to marry her. Mission accomplished. So let's talk about Symphonie Fantastique, which I actually just really like to say. Fantastique. It's fantastic. The other name he had for this particular composition, the symphony, was called Episode in the Life of an Artist. Symphonie Fantastique is actually what's called a program symphony. And a program symphony is music that is supposed to convey an impression of events, or like a narrative. However, in this story that this music tells, it's not like you're watching what's happening. It's not like a play or a visual is there or something's dancing in the background. It's literally just the sounds of the music, and you, the audience member, probably have like a program in front of you and you're listening to the music, and you can read also what that music is supposed to be conveying at that time. So the thing about Symphonie Fantastique, if you don't know the story behind it, when you're listening to the music, you're going to be like, I don't know what's going on, it just sounds like music. So you kind of have to know the story behind it. This particular symphony was very unusual for the time for a couple different reasons. The first reason is Berlioz asked for 90 instruments to be on stage, which Now in symphony orchestras, sometimes that happens depending on the piece that was composed or whatever the composer asked for. But then, back in 1830, that was unheard of. That was a lot of people. Like, where are you supposed to get 90 musicians from? Now you want to come back up here? Now you're complaining? Now you want to come stay here? Are you going to stay like that? Or are you going to... Okay. So, that's a lot of instruments. The other thing is that Berlioz composed Symphonie Fantastique with 5 movements. We're going to talk about each movement, but usually during this time, most composers had only been composing with up to 4. So that was also very unusual for this time. Nowadays, whatever, that's not a big deal. But at that time, that was pretty groundbreaking. I know, I love you too. So Symphonie Fantastique, it's supposed to have like a dreamlike quality, and it's overall basically a story about an artist who has a really wild imagination, and in the end he poisons himself because he's really sad, and it's hopeless because the person that he loves doesn't love him back. In a nutshell, that's what it's about, but each movement tells a part of that story. In the first movement, it's called Passions, and there's a young musician, and his spirit is sick. And he sees for the first time this woman who is like the ideal woman in his eyes, like beautiful and whatever the ideal woman is. What is that, kitty? And he falls desperately in love with her. So that's the entire first movement. Are you starting to recognize a theme here? So the second movement is called a ball. Now, not a ball like mocha basketball. It's like a ball like a dance, like you'd go put on a frilly dress and go dancing. The artist finds himself at a party, and he's having a good time, but everywhere he goes at this party, he's reminded of this image of that woman, that ideal woman, and it's like haunting him almost, and it sends his spirit into confusion. Like he can't even enjoy the party because he keeps thinking about this girl. That's the entire second movement. So the third movement is called Scene in the Fields. And so the artist is now in the country, at the countryside, and it kind of restores and calms his heart. Like he's calm now, which the country can do that to you in a good way. But he starts thinking about how lonely he is, and what if this woman, this ideal woman, what if she falls for another? And then you can hear in the background, there's like this distant sound of thunder, and then it's like silence. So it's kind of almost like this foreshadowing, like a premonition in this story of like what's to come. The fourth movement, which I think is actually the most famous movement from the symphony, is called March to the Scaffold. So he just got himself all upset, and he's like, I'm gonna be alone forever. Forever alone. And he poisons himself. So even though, like, after he drinks this poison, it's not enough to kill him, he's like, he passes out and he starts hallucinating because it's poison. Please don't drink poison. So he starts to have all these really strange dreams that he killed the ideal woman. Don't do that either. And then he's found guilty of it, and then he has to march and walk to the scaffold. So if you don't know what a scaffold is, it's the thing, it's like the platform where people have to walk onto if they're going to be hanged by a rope. And it's got the stairs. So that's the whole point of the song, is he's walking, he's marching to the scaffold, onto the stairs, to where he has to hang, and he watches his own execution. It's pretty dark. Luckily, this is all just a big story. The last movement in this symphony is called Dream of a Witch's Sabbath. So the artist sees himself in a witch's Sabbath. And if you don't know what that is, it's basically a gathering of people who practice witchcraft. And he's surrounded by witches, sorcerers, and monsters, and who knows what else. Who knows? Like evil things. And around him are just all these really strange sounds, and there's like grunty noises and like these evil laughs, and then they're shouting. People are doing like all these crazy evil dances. Crazy evil dances. And then who walks into this little witch party is the ideal woman. And everybody at this party is all like, ideal woman join the house! And they all start partying even harder because she showed up, because they all like her. So he's like, oh my gosh, this lady who I idolized is now here to kill me. The next thing that happens is the funeral bell rings, and that's because he's dying. So as he's dying, because he poisoned himself earlier, all these witches and evil things are dancing around him. And then he dies. I'm sorry I just told you another messed up story. Remember, it's not me. These composers made it. The thing about this particular story about Symphonie Fantastique is that in real life, this is actually even more messed up. Here's the thing that actually I'm like, here's like the real tea. He wrote this symphony to get approval to marry his fiancée, Camille, from her parents. Like, I wrote this to get approval. But Symphonie Fantastique is about the girl he stalked, Harriet Smithson, for about 3 years before he even met Camille. That is so messed up. That's really... This man creates his own drama. Don't do that. I always kind of wondered, though, is this something that Camille realized? Like, is this something she found out who this was actually about? That would be some tea. But I don't know. That's just a question I have. Any historians? Anyone? I really want to know that. So anyway, he wins the Prix de Rome, and he's happy because he's going to be marrying Camille. And he gets to Rome. Things are going fine. 6 weeks later, he gets a letter in the mail from Camille's mother. And it says, yeah, Camille is actually not going to marry you because she met another person, and she's gonna marry that person instead. So have a nice life. Bye. Whoa, wasn't expecting that one. And then I also wonder this, why couldn't have Camille written that herself? She got her mom to do that? Come on. Anyways, Berlioz lost it. He was like, what? Are you kidding me? I just did all this stuff for you. He decided, clearly, I have to murder this new fiance and Camille's mother. Obviously, that's the reasonable thing to do. Don't do that. So he comes up with this big plan where he's going to disguise himself as a lady's maid. So basically, a lot of time, like, people who had money would hire a maid just for them, like a lady's maid. Like, help me get dressed and do my hair and blah, 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 that kind of stuff. He was going to disguise himself as one of those people, thinking he can get into Camille's house a little bit more easily. It's like, I'm pretty sure you look like a dude. No one's going to let you into that house. Berlioz. He even purchased a dress, he got a wig, he got a hat, and he had this whole costume ready because he was going to get into that house. He stole 2 pistols, and he was able to get his hands on like different kinds of poisons and stuff. What are you going to do with all that stuff? He was for real. He was going to kill some people. So once he had all of his stuff already, he peaced out. He left Rome, and he's on his way to Paris, but he realized on his way there, because he was all upset and everything, that he left his disguise at home. So he did all of this planning. I'm gonna disguise myself as a lady's maid, and I'm gonna kill all the... He left it. He left the whole costume at home. So by this time, once he realizes that, he's like halfway to Paris, but he's had some time to calm down. Good thing. And he decided ultimately, you know what, I'm just gonna go back to Rome. But he wasn't happy in Rome, which I can imagine. Did he get to study composition there? Absolutely. He got to do things, but he was pretty miserable. And he wasn't allowed to leave because of this prize for at least 2 years. So he left as soon as he could. So 2 years go by in Rome, and then he goes back to Paris. And he puts on another concert of Symphonie Fantastique, because now he's going to pay bills and put on concerts and stuff like that. That's his job now. But guess who's in the audience? None other than Harriet Smithson, the same woman he stalked for 3 years, and the same woman he wrote Symphonie Fantastique about, and she's in the audience listening to it. Apparently, she loved it. And there's reports there were some parts of it, and she was moved to tears. Oh my God. So after the show, Harriet Smithson, funny turn of events, she comes backstage to congratulate him. And they get to talking, and they're like, let's meet up. Let's have a date. A first date with my former stalker. They go on this date. It's like their first official one. And after the date is over, Berlioz proposed to Harriet Smithson. And she said yes. I guess it's like her stalker. Well, I guess it's her fiance now. Like, there's so many questions. Like, why? Why was she suddenly like, oh, hi? As far as I know, from what I can tell, her career was starting to go into decline. And she was struggling to make a name for herself on the stage. Now, maybe she truly was moved and impressed by this musical work. I can give her the benefit of the doubt. But there's also other things kind of showing that maybe that was not the only reason that happened. Less than a year later, they get married, which is probably Berlioz's dream, because like he thought this woman was the ideal woman. Except there was one problem. Berlioz did not speak English, and Harriet did not speak French. This marriage is on a great track. What could go wrong? But life went on, as it so does. And they eventually had a kid. They had a son. He kept composing, but he couldn't just support him and a child and his wife on just composition, so he had to get other jobs. So he did like music criticism. He worked as a librarian at the Paris Conservatory where he went to school. He was a touring conductor. And it's funny because some people, there's different accounts of him being a conductor. Like, apparently he didn't have a lot of conducting skills, but a lot of his conducting was more like, it was all showy, it was all flair. So there's Some accounts, like music critics would say, like, he swoops a lot. There's a lot of crouching. Yeah, the audiences loved it. And also he had like an insanely large hairdo as well. So it wasn't just like normal dude hair for the time. It was like large and in charge. So there are some caricatures of him, and it's this little man, and it's like all hair. Like, he just had obnoxiously large hair. So really, like, people like to go watch him because not only did they like the flair of his conducting, but he was like a character almost watching him. So people, like, even though his conducting skills weren't there, they still enjoyed watching him, like, a lot. So while all of this is happening and life goes on, life at home with Harriet wasn't so great. Who'd have thunk? Harriet kind of, over time, stopped doing the normal wife responsibilities of the time. Because a lot of times during that time, if you were a woman and you got married, your job was like to run the house. Women didn't work like they do now. That was your job, was to take care of things. Harriet kind of stopped taking care of the house. She stopped taking care of their son, and she started drinking a lot. And then she would also, like, while she's drunk, she would just be really loud, and she would accuse Berlioz of cheating on her, and he was like, I don't know where you think I'm doing this. Like, I'm here. Like, how can... And he would deny it because it's not true. Well, eventually, Berlioz got really sick of her saying all these things, and he was like, well, you keep accusing me of doing this, I might as well actually do it then. Dang! So he had an affair with an opera singer named Marie Martin. And this affair lasted for a very long time, like years, like 15 years. After 15 years, Harriet, she actually died of a stroke. Oh, bye again. But right after Harriet died, like right after, Berlioz then married Marie. But I think he was also really happy with Marie. Like, he found someone he was truly happy with, not someone he had idealized and, oh, this must be the perfect woman. I think he was legitimately happy, which is good. Eventually, though, Marie very suddenly died of a heart attack. So they had only been together for like maybe 6 or 7 years, and that happened. And he was heartbroken. And he even went to go visit her grave in Montmartre, at the Montmartre Cemetery, which, if you've ever been to Paris, that is such a cool cemetery. You should totally go. But he would walk to her grave every day just to visit her. So sad. The other thing is Berlioz's son, he grew up and he became a sailor. And he died about 5 years after that, and he got yellow fever in Havana, Cuba. And he died from that. So I think just between all of this, he was finally in a spot where he was happy in his life, and then the people he loved were dying around him. So he was upset. And then one day he went to just go lay down because it wasn't feeling that great, and he died in his sleep. And that was the story of Berlioz. It was kind of sad in the end. So today we look at Berlioz's life, and according to music historians, that's correct, I think. Anyway, his reputation is kind of in dispute. So some music historians, they see him as this really unconventional musical rebel, a genius innovator, and someone who completely changed the face of the Romantic era. Or they see this guy with all flash and no substance. Whatever the case may be, whatever your opinion is of this man and his music, is that he definitely lived an interesting life, and he was probably the most romantic composer. The man loved love, and he also loved being in love, and I think that greatly influenced his music. Thank you for joining me today on this episode of Composer Tea, where we spilled the tea on Hector Berlioz. I have no idea where my co-host went. Some people would kill for his job. He's lucky I love him. I hope you can join me next time. Have a good week. Bye.